Okay, before we can start using Ruby and building Ruby programs, we first have to get Ruby onto your system. So I'm going to walk you through how to do it regardless of what operating system you have. And I'm also going to give you an alternative if you don't want to install it on your system right now, and that's totally fine. So if you go to ruby-lang.org, you'll see this page right here, or you could just type in Ruby programming language and it'll be the first one that pops up. This is the official Ruby site, and you can click download Ruby, and it will also give you your different options based off of what operating system you're on. If you're on Ruby, then you're going to want to come to, if you're on Windows, you can go to rubyinstaller.org. And if you come here, well, the actual homepage will look like this. Just click download and then pick out the version you want. And any of these, any one above 2 will be perfectly fine. I'd probably suggest either 217 or 223, and make sure to pick out if you have a 64-bit operating system and that kind of thing. So pick that out, run the installer. It'll do everything for you and you'll be ready to go. If you're on a Mac, you actually already have Ruby installed on it, and I'll show you. You could do something like this, where you create a Ruby file. So I created one that says, do I have Ruby, with underscores separating each of the words, and I just wrote puts, yes, you have Ruby right here, and then open up a terminal session and make sure you're in the same directory. So type in ls and you can see do I have Ruby is a file I have right there. And if you have Ruby on your system, just type in Ruby and then the file name, hit return, and it says yes, you have Ruby, which means what it did is it just ran that Ruby program. So that's how to, if you have a Mac, you already have access to it. Now, one thing, though, that you can do on Mac and Linux that you may find handy is using a system like RVM, which stands for Ruby Version Manager. So you may want to, on some projects, use one type of version, and on another project, use a different version. That's pretty common with different projects you build. Now, if you go through the instructions here to install RVM, these are all just commands that you can copy and paste right into the command line. I'm not going to do it because I already have it installed. But once you do have it installed, you can do something like RVM list, and it shows right here all of the different Ruby versions that are on my current system. And so if I want to change to another one, I can say RVM, RVM use 2.12, and what it'll do is it'll go to that version and see here it says now I'm using this version. Not a huge difference. You don't really have to worry about this right now, but as you do start to build out bigger and more applications, I should say, that's where it usually comes into play. Is I'll have one application that uses version 2.17 and another one that uses 2.12, and I'll have to switch between the two of them. And so that's something you'll find as you take on more projects. So you don't have to worry about it now, but it is important to know, and it's very easy to add and control right from the terminal right here. So that's if you're on a Mac, or on a Linux, you have the same Unix shell, so you can do the same thing. But if you're on either of those, you can start the course right away. It's already going to be built in. And the last thing is, if you don't really feel like installing the system, you just want to start diving in the code, that is totally fine. You can come to this site, Repl.it, REPL.IT, and pick out, well, you can pick out any language, but for this course, pick out Ruby, and it actually gives you a full terminal session right here and will render all of the Ruby code. So if I do puts running Ruby from the browser and hit run, you can see right over here, it printed out exactly like this was a Ruby file, and we ran Ruby just like I did a second ago from the terminal. So if you want to just dive right in and jump in, start building some code and running some programs, you can use this. I actually, even though I have Ruby on my system, there's a lot of times I'll pop REPL open because I really like this interface, and I like being able to see the terminal right next to it. So if I have a kind of confusing algorithm or I have some buggy code, there's a bunch of times I'll copy and paste my program right in here so that I can see it side by side, and it also gives some good error messages. So that's how you install it on your system, and that covers Windows, Mac, Linux, and none of the above if you want to just use REPL for a browser-based environment. So now that you have that, we'll get into a few more things discussing the language and also how to install a different version of Ruby on your system if you have RVM.